in the supply chain and operations field. So that's where I got my start. And really through that, kind of going through leadership roles and things along those lines, really developed a passion for coaching and mentoring folks. And I'm also a real estate investor, and I have a property management company that I run. And we had been considering making an acquisition of another business. There's a book I read years ago called Buy Then Build by a gentleman named Walker Deibel, which is a fantastic book about the idea of basically every year there's over 1 million businesses that shut down in the United States and 1 million businesses that start in the United States. And so it's just this basic idea of if we could facilitate a transition of ownership among those businesses, that would be massively beneficial for the economy, because 50% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years that they're in business, right? Being able to acquire a business that's already crossed that threshold, less than 1% of businesses ever reach $1 million in revenue. So again, like, these are significant milestones that if you're able to shortcut, really allow you to be successful. And having started my property management company from scratch, just learned from my personality and my background that doing an acquisition was probably going to be better suited to my skill set at this point in my career. And so went down the path, and having looked at a number of options, an accounting firm was what we decided would make sense to do an acquisition on. And ultimately in April of 2023, I bought my current firm, which is Our Team Accounting. So we are a remote, I guess, call it bookkeeping firm. I've got 5 team members supporting our clients. We've got just under 60 clients that we support right now. That's a little bit about my background, and a little bit about my firm.
James, so we do have several people who are brand new, obviously starting bookkeeping business, and some who've been in business for several years and things like that. But like, when you're going to acquire a new firm, what are some things that like you're looking for that would be key for them to be keeping in mind if this was something they were thinking about doing in the future?
Yeah. So as somebody who, again, bought my practice, you really need to understand the marketability of your particular business to potential buyers that are out there. And so the 2 things that I saw most common when I was looking for businesses to acquire were businesses whose fees were too low, and businesses where the owner had 100% of the relationship with their clients. Those 2 things for me basically mean that you have a job and that you're not running a business. So what I would say, again, depending on where you are in the country and things along those lines, it sounded like you guys recently did something on pricing and things along those lines. But
Yep.
the sooner you can get your pricing either away from hourly pricing to prepaid monthly billing is huge. My firm, when I bought it, was not that way. We still had hourly pricing, and we made the transition to fixed rate pricing in February of this year. We started that process with kind of full transition through April. And really, if you think about that hourly pricing, is you need to get that north of $75 or $80 an hour as quickly as possible from an effective billing rate. And I see far too many folks that their billing rates are $40, $50, $60 an hour. And the fact of the matter is there's just no ability to support any overhead or outsource staffing and generate profit margins north of 30%, which is what a lot of acquisition folks would really be looking for. So those are like the 3 big things that, as you're thinking about wanting to grow your business, the thresholds that you'd want to hit to be able to really have your business be marketable to somebody else.
You mentioned making sure that they didn't have just a relationship with the owner. I think that's huge too, because anything could happen, even if you're the one, if you don't have any intentions on selling your business, but like anything can happen at any point in time. And if you don't have employees, if you're not allowing others to handle that. So was that something that y'all had to transition with the new firm as well?
No, so that was one of the key things that I very clear. So when I started looking at firms to acquire, I very quickly filtered out the ones that had really 2 key elements to them. One was where the owner was still largely running the business. And I would say that was definitely the case in the majority of the firms I saw in the under $300,000 revenue number. They might have other people in the business because at that point, there's too much work for them to do by themselves. but they were still very much so plugged into the day-to-day responsibilities of managing client books and things like that. The second thing that to me was always a death stroke was if they had other employees, they were family members. So it's okay, you have other employees working for you, but if they're all family members who are leaving when the business is transacted, then again, like it's very much so a very interpersonal relationship that you develop with your clients. And so it's okay if everybody that's in the business is leaving, then like you're effectively buying a client list, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but understanding that there's a lot of like you're gonna sell for significantly less because again, you're not actually selling a business at that point, you're selling a client list. And two, you should totally expect to have to carry some sort of basically seller financing on that would have a forgivable portion of that seller financing sometimes, which basically is around like client retention. So for a period of somewhere between 1 and 3 years, if there are not benchmarks that are hit in terms of percent of revenue or percent of clients that are retained, then you're able to basically not pay a certain portion of that loan back. So again, like that's just something to be aware of. That's not uncommon for probably a larger firm that's just looking to acquire a book of business to fill out they have available capacity that they're basically just looking into to bring business into that way, especially if they're maybe somebody that does taxes. And so they're seeing it as not only, hey, we have available capacity, so we want to improve our overhead cost absorption with our labor and things along those lines. So we'll bring in new, but then if they have the ability to cross sell in tax services, there's potentially incremental upside to them with the client base that I would say, again, like there are people who will do it, but like I said, it's a smaller audience and there's a higher risk associated with a buyer potentially looking at something along those lines.
Are there any other services besides just the taxes that would have a higher risk like that?
No, again, the other piece of it, again, there's a big push out there right now to start offering like fractional CFO services. I myself, I'm what's known as a profit first professional for anybody who's potentially familiar with profit first. So that kind of is where I go with a lot of my fractional CFO related services and businesses that get built up really around that is probably as deep, if not deeper than tax planning and tax strategy and even the bookkeeping side, because you get really intimate with your clients and their business beyond just the transactional nature of what's happening inside of their books and stuff along those lines. Just having a knowledge and an understanding of that can be great margin revenue, but it's also, again, difficult to transition if you have those kind of, what do you want to call it, fractional controller, fractional CFO, consulting. Again, different people will call it different stuff. The more of that you as the firm owner are doing, that just has a lower quality of revenue for somebody who's looking to acquire the business, unless, again, you're planning to stay around for a period of time. There's other ways that potentially mitigate that, which just depending on what you're looking for from an exit, a lot of times you're not wanting to stick around, right? You might have health issues that you need a liquidity event for. You might have a change in your family situation. It could be retirement. Again, it could be any number of things that most people are not planning to sell and then stick around for another 3 to 5 years or something like that. But if you're willing to, then it makes it easier to do that type of a transaction.
Yep. Awesome.
Question. I'm gonna rapid fire at you again.
Yeah.
So obviously bookkeeping, like we don't want to be doing the work. What about the sales side? So a lot of bookkeepers, one of the easiest things to first outsource is the bookkeeping and having that team communicate with the clients. But then the bookkeeper is left doing the sales. Do they also need to be mindful of exiting themselves from the sales process entirely?
I think it depends on how your sales process works. So what I can tell you, I've probably looked at north of 30, 40, 50 businesses, firms for sale. I would say of all the firms that I've looked at, only 2 of them have ever actually had legitimate marketing budgets. So the vast majority of firms, the owners are doing the business development side of things in the sense of all of that. And so from that perspective, it's going to be a little bit more of what's your actual sales process look like. This is something where, again, my background, I'm not an accountant. So like I am personally not doing the accounting in my firm. So that was why I bought the firm that I had. I have 2 team leads who run all of our client engagements, do all of the reviews of the books, and oversee all the day-to-day kind of stuff. I've taken accounting 101 and 102, know the basics of all of that sort of stuff. But again, my background is in that higher like FP&A level. Okay, let's look at the financial statements and talk about extracting business knowledge and business value out of that rather than, hey, does my trial balance tick and tie out? And if it doesn't, can I figure out why? That's what my team handles and that sort of a thing. So from that perspective, like I've seen owners who on the sales side are like, they're doing the selling, they're doing the onboarding, they're handling all of that stuff themselves. And if you're doing that through something like BNI or some other type of like referral marketing perspective, again, that's very difficult because again, that's very relationship based, right? And there's a certain amount of like small business always going to be that way. But once you start getting to a point where you can introduce somebody else into the process of doing the sales, where it's not 100% you, then you do start to have, again, let's call it like that next level of like security in your business. I would honestly say, I think that's a lot harder to do until you start getting to $500,000, $700,000 of an annual revenue to have additional support and resources there outside of just incorporating members of your team at some point through the sales cycle, sales process, onboarding, so that there is this cleaner handoff where people, again, it's more of the operational side and the sales side. But if you think about it, like you don't want to run somebody all the way through the sales process. They've developed a relationship with you, and then on the very next day, like they're handed off to somebody brand new. Like they haven't built a relationship with that person. And accounting for business owners is a lot like going to a doctor when you haven't been to one for a long time and you need a physical, and they're going to tell you to strip down naked and tell you all your problems, right? Like it makes people uncomfortable to do that. And so when they're now having to talk to a stranger about, a lot of times, to be frank, right? Like small business owners, their books are a mess, their finances are a mess, right? And so there's some sensitivity around that. And so if they're able to build that trust and rapport with somebody else other than the business owner during the process, I think there's huge wins that kind of come with that. And that's definitely like, that didn't exist in my firm. That was one of the things we've spent the past year plus like continually iterating on, is how do we get better at that? Because it was like the owner had all the conversations and then was like, great, we're going to onboard you, get everything set up. And then once we do that, here's your bookkeeper now. And it was like, there was that jarring handoff that wasn't great versus starting that relationship much earlier in the process, which is what we do now. And I'm not saying we've got it perfect, but I do think what we have is better than what we had before.
That makes a lot of sense. So I know a lot of people that are going to listen to this initially are still under the 500,000 mark.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds like one of their first priorities is consistent clients, potentially with the owner doing the business development, but attracting leads that aren't necessarily BNI related, or as soon as they can.
And to be transparent, like that's where you need to start. Right. So I'm not telling people like, hey, don't start there. If you're starting there going to BNI and you're starting there going to all those places, and that's how you're getting yourself your first 5 or 10 clients and whatever it is that you need to get so that you're getting 100, 150,000, that's great. And that's fine. Like I'm not trying, what I'm talking about is as you start thinking about trying to build your firm as an asset to potentially be able to sell, like those are the things that you need to think about in terms of your business structure to maximize your ability to sell your firm for the highest dollar amount possible. Versus, again, I literally had a broker send me a firm listing that they were getting all of their clients off of Upwork, and the average client fee was like $40 an hour. Like I pay my team $20 an hour plus, right? So once you take into account like my insurance costs and other overhead expenses, I'd literally be making like $2 an hour on that work. There was zero margin at all in it at charging $40, $45 an hour. Because you also have to realize when somebody goes and does an acquisition, so the most common form of doing an acquisition is using what's called the SBA 7A loan, which allows you to, the SBA guarantees the loan. You only have to come 10% out of pocket to do the acquisition. And when you have that much leverage on an acquisition, it's a 10-year loan that's currently carrying, with the latest rate adjustments, about a 10.5% interest rate. So when you look at what would be what's generally called the seller's discretionary earnings, like at the end of the day. So it's like whatever your salary plus distributions plus other like benefits you give yourself. So your health insurance, if you're running any vehicle expenses, cell phones, office expenses, like all those things that you might pay yourself that would be different for a different owner, like that number, about half of that is going to get consumed by the loan payment. And so like when you're looking at all of these ratios and things along those lines, like there still needs to be enough meat on the bones left over. And the more of that structure that you have, where it's not somebody jumping into like their own job, just makes your firm more marketable. So again, it's just as you grow, those are the things to keep in mind. But I would not tell anybody like on day one that like, oh, like you need to not be doing the work and not be doing the sales and not be doing all the, no, like if you're working on getting your first 5 clients, like you should absolutely be doing that because your goal right now is just to generate enough income for yourself. It's just as you start trying to go beyond, hey, this is a part-time job for me, or it's a way to make some side income or whatever, to the, I actually want to become a business owner and build a business and build an asset that I may be able to exit at some point in the future. Then that's when you need to start thinking a little differently about what's important and how you're building and designing your firm and your culture and your processes and all that stuff. So sorry to cut you off, Sherry. I just wanted to make sure I was being really clear that I'm like, there is a time and a place for what you just said that people should be doing. And for the folks on this call who are there, I don't think they're doing anything wrong.
No, and I appreciate the clarity. We say, especially under 6 figures, like forget niching, forget those things, go make the money. Like,
Yep.
So absolutely, I appreciate that. Interestingly, I did grow. I hit 6 figures primarily through Upwork, but I was not $40 an hour. I was closer to 100 an hour and a little bit more than that. So definitely a different approach. So if you heard that and you're like, I don't want to use Upwork anymore,
No,
it is
and again,
possible.
to your point, like I said, I'm not trying to say Upwork's a bad place to get it. My point is there's plenty of people on Upwork, and everybody on here knows. And like for my property management business, before I bought the accounting firm, like we hired a person in the Philippines that we were paying $5 an hour to do our bookkeeping for. Like there are people out there, they are on Upwork, they are charging 5, 10, 15, whatever dollars an hour. And that's the thing, right? And so when you're getting started, especially on a place like Upwork or any other marketplace, there's a certain point in time where if you have nothing to show for, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going and getting your first client at $40 an hour. What I'm saying is don't build your business off of $40 an hour clients, right? Like you need to get in there. You need a little bit of that quid pro quo. Let them know, hey, like my fees realistically should be $75, $80, $100 an hour, or I'm going to be charging fixed rate fees. But right now I'm offering this, and 6 months in, I will guarantee that you'll be locked into this rate or whatever it is that you want to do. But be like, hey, if 6 months in, 9 months in, whatever it is, like you're happy, like I want a written and a video testimonial and all of that sort of stuff so that I can help grow my client base and grow my business. 100% get that quid pro quo, because again, the more of that like referral business, like referral mechanisms that you can put in place, like that is huge for being able to start putting on your website or your social media to attract new business that's going to pay you more than what you're currently like offering. Definitely use those building blocks to your advantage. And absolutely, like you can build it. It's just, you got to realize that again, the folks going to Upwork who are looking for $100 an hour people have a different expectation than the folks on there looking for a transactional, like I need help with this one little project and I don't feel like paying, what it's worth. You're going to have a much harder time trying to prove your value to somebody who's shopping for that kind of service, right?
Yeah. When I was on Upwork, it was when it had first just rebranded from, I think, Elance or whatever.
Yeah.
It is a different playing field now. Like it has been found by everyone. And so it's just a different place to play. So the rules are a little different in terms of just what you're going to find and people's expectations. Whereas when it first rebranded, it was very much you're looking for a professional who can execute a job. So I got to take advantage of that just newness, instant respect of I'm offering you a service to fix your problem. And I was able to position it that way. So absolutely, you have a lot of different marketing avenues to grow your business. And then if you are working to sell, I think one of the main reasons we wanted to invite you on was just to open the world of possibilities for the bookkeeper who's doing this right now as the side hustle or to pay the bills, especially with the economy the way it is. Like it's Megan she says this all the time, and she said it yesterday too, that her and her daughter will say, oh, time to go get another client because an expense comes up. And that's very much true right now when it's yourself running the business. And for a lot of the bookkeepers that are listening, that's where they're at. But as you start to say, what's next. I'm comfortable now. I've gotten to a point where I'm comfortable. What's next? I think this sometimes feels like an impossibility. Like it's not possible to sell. And I think it so is. And so then you start to transition. Oh, okay, now I've built an asset. What do I need to do now?
Mhm. And one of the things that I would encourage folks on here too is if you are getting into the position where you realize you want to grow it from, call it the side hustle, into a business, there are a ton of what I'm going to use the term micro bookkeeping accounting businesses out there. And again, they sit on the marketplace for a long time because they're not attractive for a lot of end buyers, because people aren't looking to buy themselves a job where, again, after the debt service and all of that sort of stuff, you're going to walk away with $20,000 or $30,000 a year in additional cash flow. That said, again, you only need 10% down to go and buy one of those firms with an SBA 7A loan. So if you are in a position where you've been able to build up that $20,000 or $25,000 of cash, that you can go out and buy a $250,000 firm, like where you can acquire those clients, you can maybe get that extra help. Like sometimes it's really hard to go from having no employees, like, hey, how do I make that first hire? And my entire team is part-time and like remote and flexible. So I think that's a huge thing. There's a huge talent shortage in the field of accounting in general, but I think there's plenty of labor, and that's at least been my experience. If you're looking for people if you're able to offer them work from home and part-time, you won't have an issue finding somebody who wants to work 10 hours. So like getting the help to like diversify yourself out of your business, you don't necessarily need to be doing tons and tons of dollars in revenue. If you've got your pricing, there should be enough margin in there that you can start like having somebody else do some of that work so that you can focus on growth areas or the higher margin clients that you do want to be working on still. And so again, like if you can get some of that going, sometimes it's easier to make that acquisition. So you get one or two of those people, those helpers, and then are simultaneously doing your organic growth. So like, I think there's an opportunity to be like, hey, like I can't wrap my head around how do I get out there and grow a business to 300 or 500,000 or anything along those lines. Like there's a ton of opportunity at the chambers and all these things to do your organic stuff, but you can pretty easily find some of the accounting. There's the generic websites where things get listed, but there's several brokerages that specialize in accounting firms. And if you go look on those, like nationwide, there's ones that are, many of them sub $300,000 in revenue that are what I call within grasp if you're able to build up the nest egg that you need to acquire those. And then through acquisition, like you can ultimately sell them on the back end, right? Because you can put together a $500,000 firm or a $700,000 firm or get to that seven-figure number. So
I love the creativity. Just thinking outside of the box there. And once you get there, James, is there anything else you would like to tell the individual who's gotten into this to do job first, in essence? So they're paying their bills. They're looking for that first six-figure firm. Do you have any encouragement to offer them? Any tips, anything to do it without burning out, things like that?
oh man, I wish I did. And I say that because like it is hard when you're starting out. Keeping in mind, I was not in that position. So I want to make sure that I am being clear in that sense. But I can also tell you, like when I bought my firm, like I didn't pay myself for probably the first year because of just a number of circumstances. So while I'm not in a position of starting from scratch, like I was definitely in a position of being like, hey, I need to figure out growing revenue because that's how I'm going to be able to pay myself. I'm very fortunate. We've always been very frugal with our expenses. My wife has a good job and takes care, has been very supportive through this journey. Like nothing about entrepreneurship is going to be easy. When you realize that whether you are starting out now and you're trying to figure out, hey, how do I get that first, second, third, fourth client because the bills are going to go up, or you start trying to build a team and like you're going to have challenges. I bought my firm and what was it? 5 months after I bought it, I had a key employee leave and took 25% of my revenue with her. So that's stuff that can happen. So it's not like you get to a certain level and like problems go away. Coaches and mentors of mine have basically always talked to me about life's going to be hard no matter where you are. It's just a matter of leveling yourself up. So if you use like a video game analogy, right? Like when you start out at level 0 or level 1 and you go and try and fight a level 7 boss or monster or whatever, like you're going to get annihilated. But by the time you're at level 5, the level 1 stuff seems easy to you now. But that was like before, you were like, man, like I remember back when I was struggling getting my first or second client. When you get to the point where you've got a business that's doing tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, like you start having different kinds of problems. So there will always be issues that you're going to face as long as you're an entrepreneur. So the like just knowing that and being able to come to terms with that, if it's the journey for you, is needing to figure out that self-care. And I can tell you, I've got written up on my wall over here, like my personal goals for the year, and like my own mental health and mental, I call it mental fitness, is like one of my key goals. So I've been doing a lot of mindfulness practice and things along those lines. I'm an avid runner, so like physical fitness was taken care of, but my mental health was not. So I think the biggest thing, like when you're talking about like burnout, when you're talking about like any of that kind of stuff, is needing to take some time and really think about where is your mental health and why are you feeling those ways, and how can you get yourself focused on a more positive mindset so that you're able to weather those storms, because you will not survive the journey of entrepreneurship if you're there now and you think you're going to be doing this for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years of your career if you don't figure that stuff out. So I think that's probably the thing that, like, being new to this full-time entrepreneur thing as acquiring my business was the biggest surprise to me. Was I got like my last role in corporate, I was a vice president of supply chain at a $300 million company and had a team of 60 plus people across multiple sites across the United States. So like I was very familiar with like stress and having lots of people, and like we had product recalls. And so transitioning in the world of like entrepreneurship and like having people's families and livelihoods be directly tied to my ability to provide them jobs. Not that I didn't have that like before in corporate, but like it's different. And so I think that the mental side of things is something that I think doesn't get talked enough about, and is definitely something to pay attention to yourself on, because yeah, it'll catch up to you quicker than you realize if you don't start paying attention to it.
The phrasing of mental fitness. Yeah.
As somebody who, again, like again, I'm an avid runner. Like I've always taken care of my physical fitness, and I always heard it like referred to as like mental health. And the biggest thing that I realized, and again, I have a mental, we call it a money mindset book club. We meet every Friday, and we're going over like a bunch of books, and not to get like too into all that stuff, but it's one of the like your brain works like any other muscle to a very large extent. And so like the stories that you tell yourself, the thoughts that you think, all of that sort of stuff affects your mental health. And so there are mental exercises, for lack of a better word, that you can do that help change and influence the way that you think and how your emotions react, and your resiliency to those types of things that go beyond mental health. And you need to actively work on trying to get it better, because if you just say, oh yeah, I need to have a better mindset, it's no different than saying, oh, I'm just going to quit smoking. Like you have to actually back that up with actions and things along those lines or whatever to actually make it happen.
I see one question for you, James. So I'm going to get to that in just a second. Allie, I know we have an announcement to make for next Tuesday. Do you want to go ahead and let people know what's happening next Tuesday? And then we'll go back to this question here.
Yes, absolutely. So next Tuesday, we are super excited to be hosting a live webinar, masterclass for you guys. We are going to be talking about how to build a thriving bookkeeping business while just working 10 hours. So we want you guys to register. It's completely free to you. So if you aren't registered for that, go ahead. I'm going to drop the link. Get registered. It's going to be on Tuesday, October 8th at 11 Central. I just dropped the link. Go ahead and get yourself signed up for that. Again, totally free to you guys. Show up, come hang out with us next Tuesday. And yeah, we're going to be talking about exactly how to make this thing successful and profitable and worth it for you.
Thank you so much. James, is there anything we failed to ask you that we should have asked you while you're on?
No, I don't think so. The biggest thing is a lot of people don't realize that, one, they can buy businesses. So I think that's something that once you realize you want to be an entrepreneur, like starting is hard. And being able to take inventory and stock of yourself to understand whether your skill set is one that can handle 0 to 1 entrepreneurship is an important thing. Mine was not. And that's why my background and my skill set is on building teams and building systems and processes and things along those lines in businesses that already exist. So it made a lot more sense for me to acquire something and then try to grow it from there. I understand not everybody's in that sort of a financial position, but what I'd also tell you is you don't have to be. There's a whole ecosystem. If you go out and, again, the book I mentioned, Buy Then Build by Walker Deibel, there's another book, The HBR Guide to Buying a Small Business. And there's a really active community on Twitter called SMB Twit. If you use that hashtag, there's an entire community out there called Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, ETA is what it's short for, of people who are out there buying businesses. And generally, they're going to be larger businesses that are doing $500,000 or more in EBITDA, usually, is what's most common in that space. But the fact of the matter is, like, when I bought my firm, I had very little cash out of pocket because I had investors that I brought in to cover like the cash down payment, like that was required by the SBA. They're minority owners in the business. As the business generates profitability, they get cash dividends, no different than an investor somewhere else would. So even if you're thinking about, oh, like I don't have the money for this, or I couldn't do that, like it's a lot more accessible than you might think if you know somebody who has some money or even a handful of people that you can raise $5,000 from to go buy a $250,000 business, right? You've got 5 minority investors now. And that's how even big businesses buy things, right? They often very rarely use their capital. They get investors to bring their money to the table. So I think that's a big component to it.
I think we answered this question as well. Can one anticipate earning more than $40 to $50 an hour providing reconciliation and cleanup services, or should one look to add another service? So like payrolls.
We talked about, again, that being a starting point for a lot of people just to get your first batch of clients and things along those lines. What I can tell you in terms of what my firm offers, we have things broken up in 2 different pricing tiers. So at our base tier, our minimum fee is $500 a month, regardless of what size that you are. And in that service, basically all we are providing is reconciliation services, right? And so you get your monthly financial statements, you are clearing your bank feeds, doing all that sort of stuff. Our middle tier, which starts at $650 a month, that's when we get into doing payroll reconciliations, when we're doing any sort of AR and AP support, building budgets, things along those lines. So those are our minimums. And what I can tell you, we were just looking at our numbers earlier last week, and our effective hourly rate is north of $100 an hour across our entire client portfolio. So it absolutely is possible based on kind of that scope of work to generate rates that are higher than that. And even Sherry said when she was getting her clients off Upwork, it was at over $100 an hour. So once you build a credibility, when you have clients who are willing to give referrals and things like that for you, my thing is start raising your rates until somebody says it's too high. And that's literally what I've done. Every single time we sign a new client, I raise our rates $25. And I have until somebody says no because the price is too high, and I haven't gotten there yet. So we're getting ready to sign another client hopefully this week, and my minimum price is going to go up another $25. So
I started doing that till I got to 500 and then slowed out for myself. And then we've been talking internally about raising going into.
Yeah. And what I can tell you is I've looked at 2 businesses this year where their minimum fee was $1,000 a month just for bookkeeping services. So now, again, a lot of times those are going to be larger multi-million-dollar clients, but the way you package things, the way you price things will attract the type of person that you're going to work with. So if your fees are $40 or $50 an hour, you're going to get a lot of businesses that are doing under $300,000 in revenue. And what I can tell you is business owners who are doing under $300,000 an hour or $300,000 a year in revenue and are paying $40 or $50 an hour are going to complain way more than businesses that are doing $3 million a year and are paying $900 or $1,000 a month for the same service. So like you'll have less headaches and have better margins the sooner you can raise your prices and work with higher quality clients. Again, not easy, not trying to say it is. I'm going through that journey right now. The vast majority of my client base is in that sub $500,000 revenue range. But I can tell you, like, my largest revenue client is a $7 million business. Like, never hear from them. they love us, never a complaint, anything along those lines, right? Like they're fantastic to work with. Whereas some of my other clients like always want to ask questions about, well, what was this and what was that? And that's why we went to the flat rate pricing. Was it eliminated all of the like questions about every little thing on their invoice. More importantly than the hourly rate is get yourself the flat rate pricing, because it eliminates so many questions and headaches that you'll have around AR stuff. So
Guys, that is so true. So most of my clients I have between my largest client hit 10 million. They're coming back, they're a CPA firm that I do their books for. They complain less. So like so when I started year one, I wound up realizing I wanted my clients to have at least to be paying 3 people besides me. So that wasn't their biggest dollar amount on their financials, because that was causing just that hiccup of, oh, I'm a new business owner. For them, they were like, they're in under 3 years of business. Now I'm their first biggest commitment. And that can be scary for a business owner. And I decided I no longer wanted to do that.
Yep.
I wound up, just when I was getting started, I didn't take you if you didn't have at least one tax return filed, because I didn't have the bandwidth to help you figure out all of that, because that's where scope creep was happening for me. Because I was just doing your bookkeeping, and then I became like their advisory, their business coach, their everything. And that's not what I wanted. So I wound up saying it was like a 3-3-3 rule. 3 years in business, 3 employees, at least 300,000 in business.
Mhm.
And that helped get me to my first 6 figures, just because I was able to narrow in on who are the biggest complainers.
Yep.
And what is that scope creep? Where is that happening? And who am I enjoying working with? And then over the past year, I was able to, now I don't know that people should do this, but this is what I did this past year. I actually shrunk my client size,
Mhm.
increased my revenue,
Mhm.
just to help stabilize. Like I want to bring in on a full-time team member, but I have a lot of people that do work, not a lot of people. I have a couple of people who work just a couple of hours a week doing like some very specific admin stuff that I don't want to touch. That's just preference. So you can do just a couple of hours. This is the first year I've had someone kind of full-time, and even then in tax season, I might split because she's getting a little overloaded just being the only like physical full-time team member. So just a note, but I think there are lots of different ways to grow it depending on what your why is. I know Megan is really good about talking about why, and that's a big key player into mental fitness, because the stronger your why is, it's easier to motivate yourself to be mentally fit and level up to those issues versus just getting, I'm going to say burned out. I don't know if that's the right word, because a client complained this week, a client complained on Friday. You woke up to an email in your inbox on Monday. It's easier to handle those when you know where you're headed. So I was just trying to encourage 40-50 guys. I think in my first 6 months of business, I did work a job for $35 an hour, and it was in exchange for a review, a testimonial.
Mhm.
It didn't take me a lot of time. I finished it in a week, but it was, I needed a testimonial.
Right.
And so I said, oh, that's going to be an easy project for me. I have the bandwidth. I have the time. Let me knock it out. I have never done $35 an hour. So just proof that what James is saying is actually lines up to my experience. I'm not at the point that I'm even remotely close to selling, but it does align with my journey just to even get into the world of bookkeeping.
Yep.
So no, I don't think you have to add other services beyond bookkeeping, especially depending on what your goal is. If your goal is a 6-figure firm, just to pay your salary, maybe have some support, I don't think you have to offer more than that.
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
I think that's another pitfall we see happen, is feeling like you need to offer CFO services, or you need to learn these skills that maybe you haven't yet learned.
Mhm.
When the reality is you can hire. One of my part-time hires, she does all of our AR and payroll for clients that have those that make sense to offer. They're larger clients, they have larger volume. So she just does payroll and AR. She executes the processes, she communicates with those clients, But if I were trying to do that, I wouldn't be able to go market. Like it would take so much work. So that doesn't make sense for me to get back into the weeds there. So just know that like you can confidently offer reconciliation and cleanup services. You can design your company around what you want and what your why is. And I think James is communicating that to you as well.
And I think it's not only, and I think the important part there that you mentioned is not only you knowing your why, but communicating that. Because I think, and again, like this is true for all fields, but I think it's, again, when you're talking about a service business like what we're in, people connect with people that they resonate and connect with, right? So like one of the big reasons I've seen a lot of smaller business owners have these headache clients is because they don't talk enough about what's important to them, right? And so if you talk about like one of the big things that we just talked about in my business. So my firm's values are human first, team second, appreciation of humor, and join the party. We recently expanded on our human first element to talk about respect and kindness. Tis the season of politics, and people turn really ugly right now. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. I have friends on both sides they get along great with, but guess what? It's because we're able to be respectful and kind. And so I've developed this rule. My daughter just started kindergarten this fall. I was like, if your behavior is something that would get my daughter sent to the principal's office in kindergarten for, then it's not acceptable. And so that's something I've been talking a lot about, especially in this season right now, because if you're somebody who's behaving that way and thinks that's okay, I don't want you as a client. My team doesn't want you as one of our clients. And so if I'm not talking about the fact that that's important to us, then I run the risk of having somebody like that come on board, and then they're going to be toxic. So when we talk about your mental health, when we talked about in the mental fitness, like some of that is if you let it into your life, like that's what's going to do that. So you like knowing what's important to you and talking about it is going to be the number one way that you can defend yourself against bringing things that are going to be toxic for you, like into your relationship.
Allie, is there anything else those listening or watching need to hear?
I don't think anything else, but just a reminder, we do have that webinar next Tuesday. I'll drop that link again. Just make sure you get registered. Free to you.
And then you'll also, I know James mentioned a couple of resources when he was sharing, so those will be linked in the show notes.
Yes, I will get those. He had a couple books, so I will get those linked so that you guys can check them out.
Yeah, sounds good. James, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed
Hopefully this was somewhat helpful or beneficial to folks. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay.
You
Bye,
too.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.